Hello, hello. Welcome back to another show of our Women Empowerment Show with Social Distance Powwow. We have a great show lined up for you, actually, a couple shows lined up for you with some amazing women. You know, the purpose of our Women Empowerment Show is to be able to highlight some amazing women throughout Turtle Island doing wonderful things for the community or just Indigenous people in general. Tonight, I have with me, joining me, two amazing women, matriarchs of their community, of their tribe, who are doing great things. I'm your host, Jessie, taking Alive-Rencountre. I come to you from the land of Lakota people in South Dakota, specifically the Black Hills area, which are the land of Lakota, the creation birth story of where Lakota people come from. I make my home here in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I'm going to introduce to you our first guest, who is the amazing Gudgy Cook. Gudgy Cook is the founder and amazing one of the leaders of the Spirit Aligned Leadership Program. That is a program where it takes a lot of, matriarch knowledge throughout Canada and the United States, and puts amazing women together. This circle specifically now, we are aligned with younger people, and I actually am blessed to be one of part of the circles for the future legacy leaders, along with some of our amazing matriarchs in many different communities, our legacy leaders. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Miss Gudgy Cook to introduce herself, and also our third guest as well tonight too.
Wopila, Jessie, I'm so excited to be with you this evening. I even have my Social Distance Powwow t-shirt on. Solidarity and support. And so happy to be with all of you this evening. As Jessie said, I am Executive Director of the Spirit Aligned Leadership Program. Our goal and mission is to elevate the lives, the dreams, and the voices of Indigenous women elders. And so along that line, the women that we work with, the elders that we work with, are all involved in the cultural preparation of the next generation. And then in our self-reflection as a people, there are new tools that Beverly Cook, who's here with us this evening. Beverly is my sister cousin. Our fathers are brothers. And we grew up together here at Akwesasne along the St. Lawrence River of the Great Lakes Basin. We are Ganyangahaga Mohawks from the Mohawk community of Akwesasne. And I am just thrilled that you'll have the opportunity to hear some of the teachings of Gyohawito Beverly Cook, who is a chief in our tribal council and family nurse practitioner who has led a life of service to our community at many levels. She's a matriarch in our ceremonial circles, and her weaving of our ancient narratives to be able to position them within the many kinds of spaces in our community, both clinical, cultural, and at the kinship extended family level. What Beverly has to share with us has to do with very important knowledge that we can use in preparing ourselves inside of this epidemic of isolation that we find ourselves in, and that we can use to regenerate ourselves, and from there, our families, our communities, our nations, and continue our relationship, our right relationship with the cosmos. So with that, Beverly, I'm happy to see you this evening, to sit with you once again, and please share with us your knowledge.
Yawako Gudgy, you always do me a great honor, with your expressions about our relationship and our work together separately and together, and how we complement each other. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to meet you all virtually in a spiritual way. And I wanted to this evening, I guess we're going to be talking about some sensitive subjects, or subjects that might stir memories, and we're gonna work through that. But in order to create a space where we all feel comfortable and we all have an understanding with one another about life in general and the subject matter that we're going to be discussing, I wanted to briefly say some words ahead of time, preemptively, of condolence, which is a ceremony that has many purposes in our ways of expressing our heart to one another.
Mhm.
And it can be done when someone passes away. It can be done when a new chief, in our traditional ways, is raised up into his leadership position. Um, and it also can be performed or conducted when we meet new people, such as this. So if I were coming into your territory, you were coming into mine, we would set each other at ease, and we would say some words that would go similar to this. In times past, when our ancestors journeyed long distances from one village to another to discuss important matters, for instance, it was noticed that the traveler was covered with dust from the road and felt fatigued from their journey, much like you may feel now and we may feel now. In order for them to focus on the matters at hand, kind words were expressed to them to help them feel safe and refreshed. And we feel that this evening similar words are needed or may be needed at this time, for you have, and we all have traveled a rough road and have come to our territory for help. We share these caring words with you. We welcome you to this home, this place of healing and recovery. We are happy that you recognized something maybe was unsettled in your life, or that you needed help with a problem. We see by your eyes that you have traveled a long way and that you have met with many hardships on this journey. We use this great eagle feather to blow the dust from your ears so you may hear and understand all that is being said to you and be able to recognize the truth. And we use this softest deer hide to wipe the dust and tears from your eyes, allowing you to have a clear vision of what is presented to you, to see the goodness that is in you and all around you, and the possibility of a good life. We use this water to clear away the dust from your throat so you may express clearly and honestly what is in your heart. And with that, we are hopeful that you will find what you are seeking. And we open our arms to you and give you this space for us to um, discuss an important matter this evening. So that's how I want to open up this time, and to hopefully set a tone that acknowledging each other's hardships, each other's pain, is an important um, part of building relationships. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Very beautiful, Beverly. My heart and my spirit already feels kind of like just centered and grounded. And there's beauty and there's power in words, and having that connection that we just made, even though we were virtually. I really, for real, my spirit feels centered. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm sure that our viewers as well too, who are listening to this and watching this episode, feel the same way as well too. So I do want to thank you, Beverly, for coming on and sharing a lot of your research, a lot of your work that you've done over the years, and the important work that is going to help heal so many people across Indian country. And so we want to say thank you on behalf of Social Distance Powwow, as well as Spirit Aligned Leadership Program as well too. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Where should we start?
Yes. So, I think, one of the things that a lot of people have heard about is about trauma, right? And I think we've heard that throughout Indian country. Um, and a lot of people don't understand the whole complexities of it, on what it does, and how it even affects us, or um, does it affect us biologically? Does it affect us just in our spirits or what? But I know that you've done a lot of work and research over the years. So I think maybe if we can start just a little bit of the basics and sharing a little bit about your story and how you started doing this important, very important healing work with trauma and such.
Thanks. It actually began several years ago. There was an opening and a blessing of a birthing center in Six Nations, which is Haudenosaunee territory near Toronto, and Gudji was a key principle in establishing this Indigenous birthing center on Six Nations territory. So a group of us were invited by Gudji to come up and to help open the facility. And one of our important people in our circle was asked to recite our creation story. And while he was talking about um, um, our creation story and how Sky Woman, as we know her, descended from the sky world onto this earth, while I was listening to this story, which I'd heard many times before in my childhood and growing up, I saw it, probably because we were in a birthing center, in a whole different way. And I I saw our our being women's ability to bring life from another place to this world, and it was part physiology, but it was part of that spiritual descent into this realm. And I thought more and more about it in the visual symbolism and so on, and I'd never heard it the way that I was seeing it. I'd never heard it told before. And sometimes in our in our ways, sometimes the older people, I mean, I'm older now, but back then, the elders then sometimes made you feel like something new and revolutionary might be frowned upon. And you might be told, well, that's not our way, or no, that's not how they tell it, or, it would be discouraging. But it was enough that I didn't tell anybody about this for about 7 years. But I kept thinking about it, and it kept evolving inside of my mind. And one day, while I was part of the treatment team at our outpatient or our inpatient drug and alcohol rehab center, the Partridge House, I had an opportunity to run a women's circle. And I decided to tell them the story because I also felt that it was empowering, how we get to be here, how each and every one of us get born, how we develop and so on. So sure enough, they felt that it really blew their minds, and they were adamant that the men should hear it as well. And so I told the story to the men separately. Uh, Finally, I decided that it was going so well that I would tell the men and the women together in a single group. And I think it was really healing for all of them. And even one young man who was in treatment at the time, after we were done with the session, said, I need to call my wife, like right now, just to express his respect and his newfound understanding of what she had given to him in terms of their children and so on, but also the power of women. And there's different aspects of that story that have grown and been added to it since then. And being able to use those parts of the story to help, especially women and men, understand their power and their responsibility at the same time in being creators of life. The story talks about the development of the baby inside of the mother and how the mother's experiences impact the development of the babies from the time of conception onward. And there's been diagrams, there's been pictures shown of the mother who's pregnant actually carrying a female fetus inside of her womb, and then the pictures of the ovaries that the little female fetuses already have at about 20 weeks gestation, which is about 5 months along. Those little baby daughters are already carrying the eggs that they're going to use for the rest of their life, and they don't get any more. That's all they have. So inside of their mother's womb, inside of their own body, inside of their mother's womb, are these little eggs, which are the seeds that are going to become the pregnant mom's grandchildren. So our responsibility is far more than just eating well while we're pregnant so that the baby grows and gets what it needs, but also how we're treated and how we treat ourselves during that time, that will positively or negatively impact the DNA that's encased in those eggs that that little baby girl is carrying. And none of that is to diminish the importance of a male fetus that's being carried by his mom, because both babies' brains and nervous systems and all their internal organs are being formed based on, one, the nutritional status of the mother, but also the way she feels, the way that she's treated, the way that she's talked to, the way that she's touched, the way that she's honored or dishonored. That both those experiences will either positively or negatively impact the way the baby's nervous systems are growing. So the fact that we are creation, that we are the creators of these little beings that are coming, and in the case of little baby girls, that even our impact is already reaching to our grandchildren. So when we think about and speak about being concerned about 7 generations ahead, we're already 3 generations into it, with the mother who's pregnant with the baby she's carrying and the coming grandchildren that the baby is carrying inside of her. So those types of things are just not commonly known or discussed. And if you see a picture of it on Facebook, like, wow, that's really cool. But man, the responsibility that comes with that that can be awe-inspiring or overwhelming, depending on how your life is going at the time. So I think in our old ways, how our women gathered together and how our women were close together, how they learned by watching and seeing other women raise their children and birth their babies and nurse their babies, and life in general was our strength and was part of our power, so that our women were confident and self-reliant, as opposed to once we started being separated from one another and living in isolated family units. I think it was more difficult, and it's become more difficult, and we're more vulnerable in many ways in the way that we live now. So there's just so much to think about just in that regard. But that's one of the teachings that I brought to those women and to the men, to understand how they got here. And we would also talk about the importance of the vulnerability of those little eggs that that baby's carrying during her mother's pregnancy. Also, at the time of puberty, the importance of how young boys are treated, because that's the time that they're going to be creating their DNA at the time of puberty. And so their environment and how they're talked to, how they're treated, how they're handled, how they're made to feel about themselves impacts the sperm and the DNA that's encased in the sperm that is also going to become children in the future. And what happens to that young man at the time of puberty impacts his grandchildren in terms of their physical health and their emotional health as well. So it's really important information. So when good things happen, that's great. When bad things happen, we need to be aware that some of those bad things, some of those traumas, and the impacts of it on our DNA is going to travel through time, and not just from father to son, but from grandfather to grandson and even beyond, and from grandmother to granddaughter and grandson as well. So I think how we handle trauma that we see occurring, how we help people walk through their trauma, how we attempt to heal is it's important, and it's not just this, like smoking somebody off. There's an intention that has to come with that, and there's words that get spoken while that is going on about how we care about you, how we think about you, how we love you, and we want you to be well, and we want you to be strong, and we're here for you. Like all of that reinforcement, that positive reinforcement, is the other part of just moving smoke around. You know what I mean? Like it has to go deep, because it is deep. And so those are some of the things that or that I try to convey to people about how trauma affects us and what we need to do about it.
I think that there was a lot of tribes throughout history that had this teaching over the years about the importance of taking care of that woman who is carrying that child. But I think a lot of this information has kind of not been passed down recently because of how fast-paced society has been. Some of this information, this knowledge, wisdom, it's kind of just stopped. And so it's important that the work that you are doing is very important, to share this, not only just cultural knowledge, but also scientific knowledge as well too. When you pair them together, it makes it powerful. I remember being a little girl and seeing my aunt pregnant, and my late grandfather, we call him Lala in our Lakota language, he'd always talk about, I overheard him as a little girl talk about the importance of taking care of a pregnant woman. And he says that when a woman is pregnant, he says she has one foot in the spiritual world and one foot in this physical world, and that you have to take care of her. I remember him telling my uncle to bring her some water, pray with it before you give it to her. And, you know, as a little girl, I would listen, but I wouldn't really grasp the concept of it. But that all makes sense now. And I think that our relatives, our ancestors knew this. But today we forget about it. And, you know, like everything that you're doing right now, this knowledge that you're sharing today is important for all of us. And I didn't know about the young men and their puberty and how that affects their future children. It's so amazing to know this, because I think when we know this type of information, it'll help our generations now, but also future generations as well too. You know, knowing this knowledge, when we reflect back on the, I guess, the trauma that our ancestors have gone through within the last few hundred years or even a little bit more, you know, it kind of explains a lot that is happening right now today with our people. Um, and I wanted to ask a little bit about what your thoughts are as far as when you say like healing, you say it's more than just taking some sage and smudging off someone and stuff. But when you're speaking those intentions into a person, can you go into a little bit more about what you mean by that?
So, okay, I might get lost in this thought, so you're going to have to bring me back to that,
Okay.
that question. But I wanted to start by saying that when people are affected by trauma directly or indirectly, so say in a developing fetus where the brain is developing, neural pathways are being laid down and the components of the brain are being formed. When the mother is stressed, stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol can course through her body. Ordinarily, the placenta would filter that, but at certain times, with intensity and duration, the placenta can be overwhelmed, and adrenaline and cortisol can reach the baby while it's developing. So adrenaline can interfere with the laying down of those neural pathways, but cortisol can actually be lethal and destroy brain cells. So it's so the placenta does its job the best that it can, but there are times when it is overwhelmed. So it affects the brain development even in the womb. The same effect continues even after the baby is born. So you have a small child who is continually traumatized or feels threatened in some way, overwhelmed, and his adrenaline, his own adrenaline or her own adrenaline and cortisol is coursing through her body and interfering with the development of their neural pathways and their brain and portions of their brain. So for girls, their brains are not fully developed until they're around 18 years old. So they're vulnerable and susceptible to these, the effects of trauma and the stress hormones in their body up until that point. And for boys, their brains are not fully developed until they're around 25 or 26. So the implications of that, when you think about young men who are sent off to war, they're 17, 18, their brains are not even fully developed. They're exposed to unreasonable and unfathomable experiences during wartime, what that does to their brains. And if you take that and you consider epigenetic changes where the DNA and the genes in a person's body stays the same, but the effects of trauma can actually change the way those genes express themselves. So that means that You may not be as resilient to stress as you would be normally if you were exposed to a lot of stress in the womb or as a child. Eventually, you're not going to be able to handle stress very well. And it also changes the way you view the world, and you start to view everyone as a potential threat. You don't trust anybody. You're not really attached to anybody anymore, because this also has everything to do with attachment. Our attachments to our parents or loving adults or our land, our ceremonies, our ways, our language, our identity, all of that plays into it. So when you think about how the brain and the neural development is affected that way, we also have to be aware that our nervous systems have plasticity, meaning they can rebuild, they can recover, but they have to be stimulated somehow. And so that's when those words and that smoke, that sage, that cedar comes into your mind and touches those places where your deepest memories are, and where your emotions are. So, but you open it up, with that smoke, and then you blow those words, send those words in behind it to reach those places. That's how I see it in my mind. Is that scientific? I don't know. It sounds it though. I'm pretty sure, because we think about science in one way, but when you think about it in our way of looking at things, it means so much more. So a doctor or a scientist can tell you the brain has plasticity and it can rebuild, but when you think about it, the way that our ancestors did things, conducted ceremonies and so on, that's how you get back in there and repair those things, and you reconnect what was disturbed, which was taken apart. You start to put that back together. Even young people, or old people for that matter, children who've had that disconnection, it's what they crave, that belonging, and that needing to be understood and to be valued. That's what we all crave, and so we need to feed that back to them. But the information, how we got here, how we got to this place, I think is important to understand. Like, we don't want people to just go through the motions, so to speak. We want them to really act with intention and purpose in what they're doing. Did I get there? Or did I
Yes.
flying by?
Oh, you did, and that was perfect. That you kind of actually answered my next question too, of why would it be important now that we kind of have a better understanding of the impacts of what trauma does to our bodies, our brains, and such, even in the womb, or even as those ovaries in our mother's when they were in our grandmother's womb. Now that we have a little bit of understanding and an introduction into how trauma impacts us, what would be like some next steps as people, not just Indigenous people, but in people in general, regarding trauma?
I think one of the most important pieces, especially, okay, so when something happens to a child, and someone says, "Oh, good thing they're little; they won't remember," or "Good thing they're never they'll forget about it." Somebody needs to say, "No, they won't. No, they won't. They're not gonna. They may consciously not remember, but their body is going to remember, right?" And that somebody has to swoop in there and make it better. And I don't mean spoil the child. I mean be there for them, to comfort them. Say you're taking your your son or daughter, they're little, to the dentist and they're terrified. Sometimes I see things like on Facebook or, wherever, and people say, oh, Indian parents will tell them to suck it up, buttercup, like you're going to be all right. And that's how Indian parents are. Well, it isn't really. It might be how we are now, but it wasn't how we were, because there was always a teaching, and it was always done with kindness. Of course, if they're going to be jumping off a cliff and falling into a raging river, you're going to react a different way. But at times like that, especially when fear is there, a parent would tell them that it's going to be all right, and I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to be right here with you, and we're going to be okay, and we're going to go and get ice cream after or whatever, and then get the ice cream after so that they trust you. But we were not that cold to our children. And so I think it's important for people to understand that these things that happen to kids, they get abused by an adult, they get sexually abused, or they get frequent beatings or whatever. It is not true that they're going to get over it. And how do we feel when we talk about the boarding school issue, or we talk about all the land that we lost, and people say to us, oh, just get over it. You're still crying about it after all these years. How does that feel to us? And we're grown-ups. Think about a small child when we say, oh, stop your crying. You're going to be all right. You're going to get over it. We do the same thing to our little ones, and there's no understanding there. So I think understanding trauma, what it does, and how delicate our spirits and our human capacity is important to build resilience. Being tough, being hard. We could think about all of the traumas that we've experienced as a people, or even individually. There's scars that are left behind. There's wounds there, whether it was maybe a violent or any kind of a sexual assault, or a rape, or a beating, or being ripped off, or being put down, being called names, whatever it is. Those are wounds, and they can heal, but sometimes they don't heal with any kind of meaning or purpose behind it. Sometimes they heal and it's scar tissue. Scar tissue is rigid. It's unyielding. It's insensitive. It's not pliable. It's not supple. That is not resilience. And I also hear some people say, well, they just need to get over it. I did it. I pulled myself up on my bootstraps. I made it. They can make it. Instead of saying, this is how I did it. And it was tough, but I made it, and I'm going to be here with you. Like, there's a whole different approach. So being hard and being tough as nails and telling our kids to suck it up, that doesn't build resiliency. It just builds hard, bitter, angry people.
Right.
So I think that's the importance of understanding where trauma comes from and what it actually does to us, and especially our children, and how we stop it. Well, we put a stop to it. We have to put a stop to it.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put a stop to it.
That's so interesting. I'm listening to you talk, and you talking about how it affects us, and it affects our biological bodies, not just our spirit, as but you think about it, these almost manifest into different aches and pains and illnesses. And, today we try to just deal with that by going to the doctor. And yes, I'm thankful for Western medicine. Antibiotics and everything like that. But we think that taking a pill for an ache is gonna take care of it. But when we think of it, like the root of it is probably going back to some type of trauma, whether we experienced it or maybe one of our parents experienced it, that it's all somehow connected. And it's so interesting just to hear this. It's kind of like eye-opening, eye-opening. And you take a look at so many people, not just our indigenous people, but people in general throughout the world, of how many illnesses that are going on because that's what's been told to so many people. We have to just get tough and we keep going and we have a job to go to do. We have so many things to do. We forget to take care of that trauma. Um, so it's
And somewhere around along the line, we do try to doctor ourselves or to make ourselves feel better. So sometimes people will start smoking because tobacco has potent anti-anxiety properties, or nicotine has anti-anxiety properties, or they drink alcohol because that makes them feel better or it makes them forget. Chocolate, pasta, they have direct effects on our endorphins in our body and make us feel better. Relationships, being addicted to relationships or just sex in general, shopping, all kinds of things make us feel better. Anger, rage, um, a lot of unhealthy, maybe risky behaviors sometimes, but it's not to be risky. It's to help us feel not the way that we do, not to feel the way we feel, to feel something different or feel something better. And that's when we end up, with diabetes or heart disease or lung disease or obesity or sexually transmitted diseases or sclerosis or, the list goes on and on. So when I was in the clinic, it was part of my problem with it after a while was, we're treating the blood pressure, we're treating the diabetes, we're treating the hypertension, we're treating all of these things, but we're not getting to the root of the problem. We're not getting to why it's hard to stop smoking. Why is it hard to stop overeating? Why is it hard, to do all these things? We never get there. We're just treating the symptoms.
medicating and putting a band-aid right on the wound. Huh?
Right. So we're helping, the person is trying to band-aid themselves with their choices, and then we're giving them another band-aid on top of that to fix what's going wrong because of what they're trying to do to help themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this whole conversation explains so much of what we see going on from people's anger and rage to the many different types of addictions. Like even you think of addictions, you don't necessarily think of things of like food addictions, right? Or even now smartphone addictions. People constantly being just distracting themselves, right? And
Right.
so it's so powerful to think of, wow, if we can just go in and do our healing work and take a look at those traumas and try to get those healed, that it would take care of so many things that have been like bothering us in general. So I think this conversation, the work that you're doing and stuff is so important because I think in general we tend to dismiss it. We pretend that it's not there, and we have learned that. We have learned to just be tough and get over it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, such powerful work. Um, Gudgy, did you want to add any remarks or comments into what Beverly was sharing with us tonight?
First of all, thank you, Beverly. That was wonderful. It brings to mind the old debate between nature and nurture, and Beverly's comments on how that works. That the epigenetic model actually shows us this dance between the interconnections of nurture and nature. That our environment creates the conditions under which those transpositions of energies at the cellular level, at the genetic level, play out. A friend of mine, Gary Zukov, wrote a book called The Dance of the Wuling Masters. And I thought about what he was saying, and it reminds me, Jessie, of the powwow, the ceremonial dancing, that it's that movement of the genes in the chromosome, always in response to what's in our environment. And so a lot of Beverly's comments show us the biological pathways in which these injuries become embedded in our bodies. And so more recent work in trauma healing and therapy goes directly to the action, the dancing, the movement. I think of how powerful our sun dances are in lifting from us from that medicine of having our bare feet on Mother Earth. That's the medicine. And so we are evolved for connection. And so much of what Beverly's conversations bring to the forefront is those healing, trustful relationships. And when you build that into the developing nervous system and keep not just the insults of human interaction, how complicated that can get, um, but the energies of the deeper connections that are expressed in our ceremonial life, in our kinship. Many of our legacy leaders who have gone to boarding school talk about having been removed from the body of their kinship network, not just the physical relationship, but the linguistic landscape of that relationship. And so this is the work of Spirit Aligned Leadership Program, to go deeper into those connectivities, those energies, to use our imaginations the way Beverly has, to bring those observations of what's not working here. Why do I feel so bad? Why am I not able to change patterns of behavior that don't serve me or my loved ones? And so these kinds of teachings that Beverly brings to our communities is so important. These are things hidden in plain sight, but it's not until we cultivate the energies, and when I say energies, I mean the biology of it, the physiologic pathways that are at work. Many of us in your audience have heard about adverse childhood experiences and the impact on our life cycle. But you can hear that again and again and again. And just like Beverly was saying about hearing the creation story, it isn't made real until you're given an imaginative context, like a birthing center, where emergence it's all about emergence. And so I just want to give my heartfelt, thank you to Beverly for persisting in the skills that she brought from our clinic into the political space of our tribal leadership, because the political will has to exist to push a community forward, to bring a community forward, so that we can cleanse ourselves from these powerful impacts in our history, so that we can regain our own imaginations. We can decolonize our spirits and our bodies, because those addictions are our colonization at work. So again, thank you, Jessie, for this space that you created for women's empowerment. This is where it begins. It begins in that little egg sac in our pelvises that is awakened in puberty and brings forward a new generation of women. And, you know, there's a saying, women hold up half the sky. And it's so true. Even in the conversations around climate change, one speaker today on a webinar spoke about, in order to respond to the climate change crisis, we need education and women's empowerment. And I thought of both of you when I heard the speaker say that, who is a man. So thank you, both of you, and all to your audience. I hope that your imagination and your curiosity has been heightened by Beverly's comments, and that you'll continue to follow your healing path, your healing journey, and find yourself, come back home to yourself.
Thank you. Palamaye, thank you. Gaji and Beverly, you know, it's just one of the most powerful healing needed shows, women empowerment shows that we've done to date here, with this, you know, sometimes difficult conversation that we can have about trauma, because it can kind of make us think of our own traumas and sometimes make it a little bit uncomfortable. But it's a conversation, something that we need to hear. Our spirit needs to be reminded of, you know, in talking and thinking, while you guys were talking and such, knowing that our answers are within our culture. That, like what you were saying, Gaji, it's simple, but they're there. We return back to our ways that our ancestors have done for thousands of years, and we can be able to be grounded again, to be able to do that healing work. So, but it's been such an honor to be able to share this space with you both virtually here, to learn from both of you, not just myself, but our viewers as well too. We're hoping to be able to come back, maybe for another episode, to continue this important conversation, maybe one or two more episodes after this as well too. But I just want to say thank you tonight for sharing, both of you, for sharing your wisdom, your words and such on this very important topic. You know, in our Lakota language, we always say that this beautiful saying of Midakuye Iwase. And what that means is that we're related, we're connected to everything, not just with each other, no matter what tribe or color of skin we have, but every living thing, because we come from that same creator. And so I just want to close with that tonight, and say Midakuye Iwase, and acknowledge that that we all come from that same creator, that we've all been made from that same energy, that same spirit. So, Pilamaye, Midakuye Owase. Thank you, ladies.
Hi.
Everybody for tuning in tonight. I want to say thank you, Pilamaye, Lakota language, which means thank you for tuning in for this very important and powerful discussion that we had with two amazing women. You know, sometimes it might be difficult to talk about trauma, but it's also very important, because that's part of the start of doing our healing work. If you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can drop those in that comment box below. We'll try to get to some of those questions, and we will be having in episode 2 a follow-up to this conversation, where we will be addressing some of the impacts on how trauma affects us with a real study. So Beverly will be going into that in our next show too. So again, Kalamaye Midakuye Owase. We will see each other again.